So how did you get into studying of the biblical languages?
It's a good question, and it's not something I'd really planned. So my undergraduate studies were mostly in kind of theology and missiology and that side of things. And I actually really struggled with the biblical languages. So it's not something that I particularly enjoyed or really got into. And it was definitely my sort of weaker hand in studies. The desire to get back into biblical studies really came after I started working with refugees and asylum seekers. And it tends to be in the context that I've worked in. I've had a lot of people coming who follow other religions, and primarily Muslims mostly, and they have a lot of great theological questions, especially questions about the Bible and text. And I don't think this is a route that everyone needs to take if they're engaging with those questions, but I just felt for myself I really need to learn more about the biblical languages and have just a greater understanding of the text that I'm talking about. So that led me into doing a top master's here at New College in Biblical Studies, and that had both Greek and Hebrew. And again, it wasn't something that came very naturally or very easily to me, but it was good, and it was a good challenge really to work on the things that I probably found more difficult. So that was really where it started, was just wanting to engage in those questions in a deeper way, and just for my own integrity in dealing with those questions and having a better understanding of my own text.
I think that's great, and I think like emphasizing the fact that you also struggled is that I think sometimes people they think that people who do PhDs they always found like the languages easy, or they found the studies easy, but it's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, no, most definitely not. I mean, it's still you're still always learning new things, and you'll sometimes read a text and you'll think, I'm really struggling with this one, or there's some grammar that you don't know. I mean, I've been looking at a lot of inscriptions lately in papyri, and I was looking at one the other day and I was really struggling just to decipher the hand. So there's always something to learn, and it's just the start to a journey, but I don't think I've ever, I mean, maybe my supervisor or Paul Foster or someone like that gets to a stage where they can just pick it up without much effort. But I think you're always learning, you're always finding something new, which is really exciting and keeps it interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I think we all always learning. Obviously, things some things might become easier over time.
Yeah, of course.
But I'm definitely, so you might not know, but I mentioned on the podcast before I'm dyslexic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So for me, like, school was not fun at all.
Yeah.
So it's all about like effort, and also looking at it as a skill you're learning, like you're riding your bike, or you're studying, you're doing like skiing or football or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, more think of it like, if you think about languages that way, then I think you're not necessarily as easily thrown off, because it's about the consistency and staying at it. And then if you want to like read like inscriptions, then you can go ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is like obviously at a different level, because it also includes different like handwritings, or if you're reading papyri, it's a completely different thing.
But you start moving into a whole nother discipline.
But so maybe we shouldn't do that.
Yeah, maybe not.
So how have you experienced that the biblical languages had opened up scripture for you?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think you'd have a really fruitful enjoyment of reading the Bible and engaging with the text, but sometimes you see things and you see it with a certain kind of color or clarity maybe that you don't see before, or even you just see things that are interesting that you didn't notice before. One thing that's always been interesting to me is when you come across, look at all the decisions that need to be made with translation as well, that you have a greater appreciation for what a difficult job translation is. But sometimes you'll see things, you'll think, oh, I have to make a decision about how I translate or how I conceive of this, and that's not always the most straightforward thing to do. So I think that it can give you greater appreciation for what scholars do on a day-to-day basis. So I think that it helps enrich your understanding, because you get really drawn into the text, and why is this word used here? So I work in Luke and Acts, and he loves using unusual words, and you think, why did he pick that specific word for, say, a belt, when another perfectly much more common word for a belt exists? Why is he using this particular word? So that's always an interesting one. It can bring out a lot of color, and I think the other thing that I didn't appreciate before I had taken the biblical languages here at Edinburgh was appreciating the different styles and types of writing that we have in the New Testament canon, which is really exciting because, Mark, you have a really great fast-paced storyteller. It's all pretty easy to read, and it just rolls across really quickly. And then you get to someone like Luke, and it's a very different way of telling the story. It's much slower. It's got the much more complicated vocabulary. It's just a different way to draw you into the story and brings different things out of the story, which is really exciting. But I think sometimes in our English translations, or any translation really, you're trying to make it readable, you're trying to make it accessible, but it's very hard to replicate what is kind of quite simple language to what is quite complicated language. And so there's a balance to be found in translation. It's not always easy, but you see that just the sheer variety that we have in our New Testament text, which is pretty cool.
Quite interesting. Yeah, I think like Luke is much more comparable to like other ancient historians,
Definitely.
like Herodotus, and like not that they're writing using the exact same language, but his style is more, like, so to speak, similar to these writings than where Mark is more sort of this. We just want to tell people the story as it is, efficiently. And clearly as possible. Doesn't have to be like too many difficult words. There might be like some words used like specifically at times, but So I appreciate that like nuance on it. You don't necessarily see that Peter is much better Greek than like 1 Peter is much better Greek than 2 Peter, for example, because in a translation you're sometimes smoothing things out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we kind of flatten the text a little bit in translation, and of course we want to translate, so you want the stuff to be understandable. But you just get a greater appreciation for, or just for even the kind of almost the personal flavor of the text that you're reading, how the personalities of the authors come through, which is really exciting.
Yeah, exactly. You might get that in John in comparison to some of the other Gospels.
Yeah,
a little bit of the personality, the style, but that's because he is he's so different to the other ones.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, you might get it in translation, but where it's like, how can we distinguish between Paul and 1 Peter, for example, in terms of like,
true.
When we read in translation, Paul, he uses lots of insight, but the same it's the same in Peter, but like the word use and the way they've structured the sentences are very different.
It's a very different type of rhetoric, and it's you see that when you're doing translation work and you're reading through in the original languages, and it keeps it really interesting and makes it really fun. And I think the first thing that I noticed when I started getting into the languages, and this is great. You get more of the flavor of the kind of personality that's behind the text, which is exciting. It makes it seem a bit more real at times.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you for watching this clip. If you enjoyed it, you can find another one by clicking just over here. Or if you want to watch the full episode and dive a step deeper, you can find a link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.